In business news today, 3 things to know. First, market volatility. U.S. stocks sizzle after technology stocks rally as a result of huge sell-offs. Then, taxes, folks. Why some Americans are paying more than others. We'll have an expert to break down all the numbers. And some high-tech companies are sitting on trillions in cash. We'll tell you who they are and what they are or are not doing with it and why it should matter to you. Arise XChange starts right now. Hello, I'm Julian Phillips in for Andrew Schmertz. U.S. stocks rose today with the NASDAQ making a rebound from its worst 3-day drop since 2011 as technology shares from the major technology companies, Google, Facebook, and eBay, rallied. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, let's take a look at how the markets did today. Markets rallied higher today in a 3-day slump, the Dow closing at 16,256, the S&P 500 closing at 1851, and the NASDAQ ended the day at 4112. Here's a look at the stocks we are watching today. A federal judge gave the Federal Trade Commission the green light to move forward with a lawsuit alleging Wyndham Worldwide failed to make reasonable efforts to protect consumer information and rejected the hotel chain's arguments that the commission didn't have the power to regulate corporate data. Security practices, Wyndham Worldwide closing up to $71.04. CVS Caremark Corp. agreed to pay $20 million to settle U.S. securities, and Exchange Commission charges that it misled investors about significant financial setbacks and used improper accounting to artificially boost its results. CVS is the second largest drugstore chain in the U.S. CVS Caremark closing down to $73.18. Well, all eyes on the Alcoa, the largest aluminum producer in the world, releasing its earnings today. Alcoa reported quarterly earnings that beat analyst expectations. The company posting first quarter earnings of 9 cents per share on $5.45 billion in sales. Analysts had expected Alcoa to report earnings of 5 cents a share on $5.5 billion in revenue. Alcoa closing at $12.53. Now for a look at commodities, gold closing up to $1,307.90 an ounce, and oil closing at $102.55 a barrel. Well, for more on market volatility and the economy, we turn to Tony Dwyer, U.S. portfolio strategist with Canaccord Genuity. Well, welcome to the show.
It's great to be back.
You know, I feel like I'm in Coney Island or something on the tornado or the cyclone roller coaster, up and down. Why so jittery in the past few days?
Well, you're up 175% in 5 years. You're up 29% last year. You can go through these periods of consolidation or just, and it doesn't have to be a reason. We keep trying to find reasons. Sometimes people just take profits. It's human nature. It's the way it goes.
Well, I like to take profits.
Right. It's nice when you get to do it, especially after the last 10 years.
Well, what do you think about the stocks going forward here? Do you think there'll be more stability or we're still going to see this kind of upward, downward trend?
I think it's a really exciting opportunity, not just for last year. I've been this way since 2009. It's very rare that you get an environment where inflation is giving the Fed flexibility to work our way out of a financial catastrophe, which is what we had. So until inflation really picks up, the fundamental backdrop for the market's terrific because the Fed doesn't need to necessarily raise rates. As long as they don't raise rates, we're still early in the economic cycle.
Well, and that's a good thing. But we've got other factors here. Overseas, we've got the crisis in Ukraine, and we've got certain interests in natural resources, gas, those kinds of things. How do you think what's going on over there might affect the markets?
It can only it will only affect it on a temporary basis. I think this is very important for the viewers to understand. It's even if you look back in the 1990s, you had the Asian economic crisis, you had Russia debt default, you had Mexico defaulting on their debt. You had a lot of events taking place in the 1990s that we kind of forget about because we remember it as this glorious decade. There were a lot of issues back then, but it didn't lead to recession, negative earnings, and therefore negative stocks because ultimately it comes down to are banks going to give us more money in the U.S.?
Right.
And as long as they're willing to lend money, the U.S. economy will continue to move forward.
Let's talk about supply and demand here.
Sure.
Money, 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 money. Remember that old song?
That was good.
Okay, you got it. The Senate approved the extension of unemployment benefits. We don't know if the House will do the same thing. How do you think that might affect the market as well?
It really doesn't. I would love to make a stronger case that it has a huge influence on the market. I really don't think it will have a huge influence on the market. Obviously, and I'm very happy if it helps the people that need that extra income. But what drives the economy, unfortunately or fortunately, is the top 20% of the U.S. population that has access to that bank credit. So it's good for the families of the people that get the increase, but from a macroeconomic level, it doesn't necessarily have a large impact historically.
Here's something that concerns me somewhat, and maybe you can kind of explain this better. The feds have given the banks an extension to meet the Volcker rule. Of course, that rule is saying that they have to limit their association, with hedge funds, private equity funds. Why the 2-year extension? What does that do?
Some of the investments that are held by these banks are illiquid investments. They can't just go out and sell it. And if they were forced, if you give them a date like next week, you have to sell your holdings by next week, you're selling into a no-bid market, right? Okay. So if you want to sell something and get the value for what it's worth, and what you're trying to do is make the banks more stable. Right. So making them sell things at prices that aren't fair isn't helping stabilize the banks.
Well, what happens? Okay, but what happens if these funds mature in a couple of years? Will that make any difference? Will they still have to sell off these funds?
What you're hoping is that the banks don't do that. They don't wait 2 years to do it. You're giving them time to slowly and methodically do it so that it doesn't negatively impact the market in an inappropriate way. That's my view of why they're doing it that way.
In terms of investment, obviously we're not asking you to tell us what to invest in. That wouldn't be prudent or wise to do. But do you think that investors might want to wait until there's a correction? We're talking about a possible correction in 3 months of like maybe 5 to 7%, and then maybe 10 to 12% in 12 months. Should they wait?
Well, it really depends on their time. To your point, it depends on their time frame. Frankly, I think the market has enough upside potential. If you just take the stock market and compare it against the historical yield for the high-yield bond market, you'd already be at 2,500 and not 1,850. So there's a lot of upside fundamentally for the market. It really depends on the risk tolerance of the people. I don't think it really matters. Ultimately, if you're looking out a year, 2 years, I don't think it's going to matter if you wait for 5% or not, any more than it did last May through June, any more than it did through 2012. Right. As long as the fundamental backdrop is good, you want to use any weakness as an opportunity.
And that will have to be the last word. Tony Dwyer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty. Today is Equal Pay Day, marking the extra time the average woman has to work to earn as much as her male counterpart. For full-time year-round workers, women are paid on an average of only 77% of what men are paid. For women of color, the gap is significantly wider. Today, President Obama signed 2 executive actions aimed at strengthening existing equal pay laws. Well, our Washington Bureau Chief James Blue joins us now from D.C. with more on that. James, of course, welcome to Arise XChange. And I've got to ask you, is equal pay something that has been on the radar for the Obama White House for quite some time or not?
You know, equal pay was the first bill, the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act. That was the first bill President Obama signed when he came into office in January of September 2009. So this is their core issue. And the reason it's such an important issue is that it speaks to all of those sort of women voters, those independent voters who are college educated and who the Obama administration is hoping will get to the ballot box and continue to support them in November.
Well, we can only wait and see about that. The question here is, of course, we're dealing with the Washington, Capitol Hill, politics. Do you believe equal pay will receive bipartisan support?
Well, these executive orders don't require any action on Capitol Hill. And what actually happens is you now have sort of 2 rules in play. You have the rules for people who are federal contractors, and then you have the rules for all the other businesses. And what the president would hope would have, that the Congress would take up these laws and enact it. But at the moment, they're not going to take it up. It has support in the Senate. It has no real support in the House. And it's a big political problem for the Republicans because their support among women is not that strong.
We got about 40 seconds left, but I can't let you go without telling us, are there any other announcements coming out of Washington this week, James?
Well, there are more announcements, we think. They won't come from Washington. The president's headed to Texas, where they're going to, he has an event at the LBJ Memorial. That's on tomorrow. And we were told today at the briefing, his spokesman didn't want to steal his thunder. So watch out. You know, maybe there's something to get blacks and Latinos to the polls, but they really are worried and they're really working on it.
I can imagine. James Blue, as always, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up, the Sheriff of Nottingham may be governing some U.S. states when it comes to taxes. Arise XChange and its band of merry people, we have to be PC around here, folks, will tell you who's coughing up the big bucks to the government when we return. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years of the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use.
Well, welcome back to Arise Exchange. Tax season is upon us. April 15th, the deadline here in the United States. And you may be interested to know Americans paid 9.8% of their income in state and local taxes in 2011, according to a report by the Tax Foundation. And that's on top of what the federal government collected. Those states with the highest taxes, well, not to anybody's surprise, I guess New York topping the list, with residents paying a whopping 12.6%, followed by New Jersey and then, of course, Connecticut. Now, on the other hand, with the lowest percentage, Wyoming at just 6.9%, closely followed by Alaska and then South Dakota. Here to weigh in more on the tax report is Liz Malm, an economist with the Center for State Fiscal Policy at the Tax Foundation, which published the data. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Americans paid 9.8% of their income in state and local taxes in 2011, the last time this data was collected, as we reported. This on top of federal taxes paid. How does this compare with other countries?
That's a great point to bring up. So on top of these state and local taxes that we all pay, we also have to pay taxes to the federal government. Now, if you compare that internationally, the U.S. tends to depend more on progressive income taxes when you compare it to other nations in the world. And we also have a very high corporate income tax rate. But you're right, there's a lot of taxes piled up on one another.
I got to ask, why is there such a disparity between the states?
Well, there are a lot of tax types that states can choose between when they're deciding how to raise revenue for their state. So you can pick between personal income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, and there's also those other taxes that aren't so familiar to people, severance taxes, license taxes. There's all different types. And so that leads to like you said, a disparity in how their tax burdens fall.
Well, I guess my question is, with the states that are paying lower state and local taxes, how do they carry that burden? How do they operate?
Well, if you look at the states on the lower end of the spectrum, like you mentioned, we have Wyoming, who only pays 6.9% in state and local taxes as a share of income. You've got Alaska, South Dakota. These are states that depend on more non-traditional sources of revenue more heavily. So those are things like severance taxes, taxes on mineral extraction. So those are more easily exported, and so those states are able to do without certain taxes like state income taxes, for example.
So you're saying, but what you're basically saying here is that there's some way that they're going to find a way to tax you anyway.
Yes, there's lots of different types, and then in the end, we all end up paying it.
That is very interesting here, because we're talking about Alaska, New Hampshire. They have no sales tax at all, and I guess they seem to be thriving. Do you think perhaps that the states that have regular state and local income tax, they can find other ways outside of taking maybe 9.8% or 12.6% in the case of New York State to make things work?
So there's a lot of ways that states are able to what we call export their tax burden, and we don't endorse and say that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just important for people to know that type of thing happens. A good example of this is when you and I go on trips around the United States. So say we go to Las Vegas or we go to Florida to go to Disney World. We pay state and local taxes to those jurisdictions when we purchase things, when we buy meals and pay sales tax on meals, when we pay hotel room taxes. So there's a variety of ways that states are able to do that.
Liz, I, like a lot of people, think we're getting taxed into oblivion. I'm tired of paying the amount of taxes that I have to pay in order to survive. Is there anything the public can do to maybe get lawmakers to lower taxes by any stretch of the imagination?
Well, our report is it aims to inform people about that cost side. And like you said, there's a trade-off there. This doesn't aim to look at the benefit side of the equation. We just like to make people more informed about the cost. And so I think that's a starting point for changing policy. And if you are unhappy with your tax burden, it's good to know where it stands first.
To say the least. Liz, question for you. Do you think, if you look into your crystal ball, that the taxes might be going up, state and local taxes in some of the areas where they are lower, and perhaps in some of the areas where they're high at this point?
Well, if we look at the trends in the U.S. in the past few years, you'll notice that this is using 2011 data, and because we're at the mercy of the census data we have available to us. But when we compare 2011, we saw 9.8% of income went to state and local taxes. But the year before that, it was 10.2. So we are seeing a decrease nationally. So that's good news. And so I guess we will have to see when that 2012 data comes out where tax burdens fall.
You know something, maybe 2012. I don't want to see 2013 at this point. Anyway, Liz Maul, thank you so much for all your insight.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. Time now for our business ticker, stories making news around the world. Russian aggression with Ukraine's borders has stressed leaders there so much they're literally coming to blows with each other. Take a look at that video. A fight broke out after one member of Ukraine's parliament accused nationalist members of setting a precedent that helped legitimize Russian loyalist strategies. Concern both over Ukraine's economy and Russian aggression elsewhere in the world have kept markets on edge and have even caused some international experts to wind down optimism around the world. That's a good left hook right there. In fact, the International Monetary Fund has scaled back its predictions for worldwide economic growth over the next 2 years. Now, the International Monetary Fund predicts global output will grow 3.6% in 2014 and push up to 3.9% in 2015. These figures are about 1/10 percentage point smaller than estimates released in January, before the Ukraine became a hotbed of political unrest. And Arise XChange host Andrew Schmerch will report from the IMF and World Bank Group's annual spring meeting in Washington, D.C. this Thursday. Be sure to tune in to see Schmerch for all of that information. Well, the hits keep coming for GM, and Auto Safety Watchdog Group is warning General Motors may have a defect in its 2003 to 2010 Chevy Impala. Well, this news after GM has already recalled over 2.6 million vehicles just since the beginning of this year alone. In more pleasant news for the company, GM will reportedly invest $450 million in its 2 Michigan plants. The funding is expected to add 1,400 jobs between the Detroit and Brownstone manufacturing plants. And GM can also be proud 2 of its models, the Chevy Equinox and the GMC Terrain, have top safety ratings for the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. In fact, their vehicles were the only 2 midsize SUVs to get that top rating. Well, congrats on that. Citigroup has reached a $1.13 billion settlement with investors who purchased mortgage-backed securities in the lead-up to the financial collapse. The agreement releases Citibank from buying back $59.4 billion in securities issued to trusts representing 18 investors. Well, the agreement is still awaiting approval from the Federal Housing Finance Agency and trustees for the investors. The Citigroup also announced its plans to close nearly 1/3 of its South Korean branches where profits are dropping. And some of the finest china in China broke records this weekend. Get this, a porcelain cup from the Ming Dynasty known as the chicken cup for the tiny flightless birds around it has set a new auction record. Sotheby's sold the bowl that fits in the palm of your hand for a record-breaking $36 million, the highest price paid to date for Chinese porcelain. $36 million in your hand. Well, ahead I want to go where the big bucks are, and I bet you do too. Perhaps it comes as no surprise some high-tech companies are hoarding tons of dough. How much and why? We'll unpack that stash when we return. You're watching Arise XChange. Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share. Welcome back to Arise XChange. It's definitely an issue any company would surely love to have, myself included, sitting on mountains of cash. A study released by Moody's Investor Service says U.S. companies have a combined total of $1.64 trillion in cash. That's trillion, folks. And this includes companies outside of the financial industry, with technology sitting on most of that cash, of course. Companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft top the list. I guess that comes as no surprise. Technology expert Max Raskin joins us now with more. Welcome back to XChange.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I mean, listen, we're talking about a lot of money. First, I like your look.
Oh, thank you.
Great minds think alike. I like that
so
Italian
much.
stitched in lapels.
Amazing.
You know, you must have a lot of cash.
Yeah,
I bet
not
you do.
enough.
You didn't get that suit from today's man, I'll tell you that right now.
No, I have a lot of Bitcoins.
We're not going there. Apple, probably the biggest in terms of what they're sitting on, and they're really not. They're not really doing anything with this. What are the reasons why?
So Apple's been notorious for not using their cash. You see, Facebook just bought WhatsApp. They bought Oculus. Facebook has been spending billions of dollars.
Sure.
Microsoft too has spent money. They bought Skype. Apple has really been sitting on this cash, and it has made some small purchases, but nothing more than $1 billion. And that's prompted investors to want to have some of that cash returned in the form of dividends or stock purchases.
Well, in fact, Carl Icahn is one of those investors that says, hey, look, guys, you just can't have all this. You got to return some.
Exactly. He's been very aggressive in talking to Tim Cook. He's been tweeting that they should be doing a buyback plan, and they did a buyback plan, but it's only a fraction of how much.
Okay, so Apple is not making any investments right now, but we have other two factors on why people say some companies like Apple may be holding on. This is one, to perform day-to-day transactions, another to protect themselves in case of a slow business or maybe even perhaps a hostile takeover. Might that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be taking over Apple. One of the other reasons to have that much cash is it makes issuing bonds and issuing debt a lot easier. You have a much higher credit rating if you have the money to pay out your coupon, and it makes the cost of financing the company a lot easier.
What are investors saying about this? I mean, outside of Carl Icahn, I mean, you have all this cash here. What else could it possibly be used for?
Well, so one of the reasons, Apple specifically, one of the reasons they have been loath to bring on new companies is that people talk about the corporate culture of Apple, how they have their own way of doing things, and that bringing on outsiders is not in line with the way that the company operates. And then another factor to look at all of this is the foreign money that's abroad, the amount of cash that's sitting on outside the United States. That's prompted a lot, many members of Congress and many policy members to talk about a tax repatriation holiday, where I think it's about $500 billion of cash is sitting outside the country for tax purposes.
That's my thing, Mr. Max.
Yes.
Money's sitting outside of the country. It's not gaining or accruing any interest over here in banks in the United States. To me, that's an outrage.
To many, it's an outrage. And I mean, the argument against bringing it back is that people say that they're just going to give that money to shareholders and they're just going to give that money, pay it out in dividends.
One word, Max. Greed, my friend. Greed.
Yes.
How many yachts can you water ski behind?
Me?
Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, greed is good. Greed is good. Greed is good.
I got to ask you, if you were a company like this, Apple, Facebook, or whatever, I mean, Facebook is doing something tangible with that money. You're sitting on over $500 million, a few billion. What would you do with the money? What would you do with it?
What would I do with it?
Yeah.
I mean, I would be investing in interesting things that are far-sighted. So the kind of things that Elon Musk is investing in, the Teslas of the world, the going to Mars. I know it sounds far-fetched, but those things have actual impacts.
Well, Max, I could see possibly going to Mars. But Tesla?
Yeah.
You gotta be kidding me.
So even if it's not a good idea, the very thought of having people create new technologies that might fail is exciting. You have to fail a little bit to be able to do great things. That's a very American idea. We love failing here.
But Tesla, come on, man. You're killing me, Max.
Maybe
You're
not
killing
Tesla.
me.
SpaceX, then. SpaceX.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to invest in that suit. How about that?
You can do that, yeah.
Max, thank you
Sounds
so much
good.
for joining us.
Pleasure.
Very interesting. Next, to smoke or not to smoke? That is the question. The debate over electronic cigarettes takes center stage when we return. You are watching Arise Exchange.
Arise serves underserved communities by bringing them news, information, sports, and entertainment from places that are becoming part of the world economy, that are becoming a part of the world voice, and decisions that are affecting things in the world that people care about. They care about the economy. They care about safety and security. And if you come to Arise and you watch our broadcast, these are the things we're going to bring to you every day, 24 hours a day.
There is a raging debate about the benefits of e-cigarettes. Are they a healthier alternative to smoking or just a dangerous craze? Well, states across the nation are considering legislation to ban the sale of e-cigs to minors. Supporters of the popular cigarettes say e-cigs help smokers kick the habit, while critics say they lead to the real thing. Well, Brent Willis is the CEO of Victory Electronic Cigarettes that's recently become the largest e-cig company in the world. He joins us now with more. Welcome to Arise XChange.
Hey, Julian, thank you.
Now, I see you've got some e-cigs here. I know you're not going to light up with these things here on this.
But you don't light them up because you just take it out and you can vape it anytime, anywhere.
Come on, technically
Sort
speaking.
of.
Well, sort of. All right, look.
Lighting up is going to be bad for you because then you're going to get the tar, you're going to get all the bad stuff in tobacco into your lungs, and that's why the combustible cigarettes, they kill 6 million people a year.
Understood.
This is different.
Right. Well, let's break this down. The states have authority and jurisdiction over this. Let's focus on the state of Florida. They're deciding now whether or not they want to sell these e-cigarettes to minors. Wouldn't you think that might not be a good thing to do, to have these e-cigarettes in the hands of minors, people 18 years old and under?
Well, you might find it strange, but I completely agree with the regulators.
You do?
100%.
Are you going to disarm me before I get a chance to attack you?
I'm on your side. I'm on the side of what is right for the country and what is, especially as a West Point guy, we took an oath to a career of exemplary service to the nation. So I think we're doing a service for the smokers of the world. And in the U.S., I think the number is 91 million smokers in the United States. It's a big enough population already. Why do you need more? So I 100% support regulations so these products that are adult products are only in the hands of adults.
All right. Okay, so there's enough money in this for you to make some sort of a profit.
It's a $720 billion category before you even think about new products or appealing to different consumer segments that would be irresponsible in the first place. This is a $720 billion category we're sourcing from.
All right,
it's enough.
You have a personal stake in this, and my EP Alvino also just told me, and I didn't know this, your father died of lung cancer.
3 packs a day.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it was, it just ravaged him, and it first went to lung cancer, then brain cancer, and it's just, for so many smokers, and I don't know if you have friends that smoke, Julian, but it is really, really hard for them to quit.
Okay.
And heretofore, there's been nothing that really helped them or really worked. Even the patches and all those kinds of things, they have a certain degree of efficacy, but not that great, to be quite honest. It's the first thing that's really working.
At the outset, this looks good, but there are some people say they've had benefits from this. But your critics would charge that this does nothing more than to promote smoking. There are certain e-cigs that have flavors to them, so they're saying this might also promote smoking. Also, there are certain chemicals that are in these cigarettes that people say could cause cancer and all sorts of other things, brain injuries. What do you say about that?
Well, with any kind of new industry, you have naysayers and you have people afraid of change. We welcome that because when the science comes out and the truth comes out, we believe that the science will hold true. Now, to that point, we know that 57% of consumers that try electronic cigarettes significantly reduce their intake of tobacco.
So you're saying
and over 20% quit altogether. So those are the best facts that we have. It's not a global fact yet, but it's the best fact that we have that these things really do help people stop smoking. But I got to argue with your point, and I like to mix it up.
No, I'm ready. I haven't fired my left hook yet.
So. But from an ingredient standpoint, these products have 4 ingredients, right? It's propylene glycol, glycerin, flavorings and herbs, and nicotine. Okay. That's the 4 ingredients, and none of those are carcinogens,
well, hold on here.
Unlike the 4,000 chemicals in tobacco.
Good point. But diethylene glycol, okay, is an antifreeze compound. You've got nitrosamines in there, okay? It's a cancer-causing compound.
These are food additives, and know those from our understanding that those additives are not in these products. They're and with the most responsible companies that, especially as the world's largest independent, we feel we are one of them. We have the most strict product quality controls and the most strict safety controls around the world because we're trying to build a very good and big business at the expense of tobacco. So we're trying to trade people out and give those smokers a healthier alternative. And of course, being a responsible company, we're going to give them a very safe, quality product.
Well, you know something, I hope this works. Brent, Willis, thank you so much for joining us today on
Thanks,
the Rise
Will.
Exchange. Okay, Thursday on the Rise Exchange, as we mentioned earlier, we'll have live reports from our hero, Exchange, Andrew Schmertz, at the International Monetary Fund's annual conference in Washington, D.C. Well, markets rallied higher today in a three-day slump. The Dow closing at 16,256, the S&P 500 closing at 1851, and the NASDAQ ended the day at 4112. Thanks for watching. I'm Julian Phillips. Have a great evening.